The topic is, should I stay or should I go? Anybody ever felt that way? Yeah. How many people? Let me hear. Yeah. All right. So we have an amazing panel, and they all have different perspectives on this topic. And for me, I used to do a lot of recruiting and executive coaching to retain talent, so it's a near and dear thing to my heart, so I may, interrupt a little bit. But wanted to kind of get a feel for the panel and where their thoughts are around this topic, and then I have very specific questions based on their role in this conversation. So to get us started, I'm going to ask each of you to, by way of introduction, just talk about that title. What kinds of examples of should I stay or should I go come to mind for you? Mike, let's start with you.
Well, I was a creative person for the first 30 years of my career. The last 10 years I was on the business side, but as a creative person, I would answer that question based on what kind of work are we doing, period. Because I knew it was all about my portfolio, my reel, what have you. And if the agency I was at was not making great work, or I wasn't engaged in doing great work, I would start thinking about moving on.
Based on the work that you're doing?
The creative work, yeah.
The creative work, awesome. Christian?
Hey everyone. My decision to stay or go is based on not so much the diversity numbers or how many blacks are in my department, but it's based on what I'm working on and my team. My team is basically my number one asset, and they weigh very heavy on my decision if I'm going to stay or go. I grew up in a community where I'm pretty much the only black person from day one all the way up until graduation, and even the military. So being solo really doesn't affect me that much, so I'm not basing my decision to stay or go based on a diversity. It's, like I said, product and team.
Michelle?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm on the talent team. I've always been an HR person and a recruiter, and any moment that I've ever had to decide to leave a company is in an interview when I'm recruiting someone to join the company. Mm-hmm. And this moment happens when there's a shift, when I'm talking about how amazing it is to join this company and what the opportunities are and how inclusive it is and all this other thing, and then all of a sudden something switches and I don't believe that anymore. And when I can't stand behind what I'm saying to people internally or in the recruitment process in a situation like this, that's typically the flag for me personally.
Awesome. So I specialized in people of color in the advertising industry, so I'll kind of give you kind of a broader perspective on what I've heard and when people would call me. Sometimes they call too late, so I want to talk about that. But what I heard from since 2005 around when people think about staying or going comes around a couple different things. One is they don't know if there's a career path for them in the organization. Nobody's given them any feedback. People of color are usually less likely to get organic mentoring and sponsorship, so often they don't know how they're perceived in the organization. They may be, of course, getting a call, right, from a recruiter, so sometimes they're just getting that call. Other times, it may be something that happened. And so you're probably all familiar with the term microaggression. I heard last night they want to change the word to subtle acts of exclusion. So that microaggression or subtle act of exclusion may turn someone from being very hot and really believing the culture and believing the leadership to being warm. So if they were in a situation where they felt like they were left out, if there was some subtle act of exclusion that happened as an experience for them, if they were passed over for a promotion, if there was an opportunity to interview or to be included on a project and they weren't. So there are many, many opportunities for subtle acts of exclusion that may make a great talent go from hot to warm and maybe more open to exploring opportunities or checking in or saying, hey, Carol, I think I need to look. So those are some of the things that come up. And so some of those are our responsibility as individuals to manage our career. Some of those is the responsibility of the organization to support you, to make sure that you're being retained and included. And some of those are leadership. But sometimes it is a good idea to move. I've talked to many candidates that were underpaid because they stayed too long. They didn't interview enough, they didn't have a network, so they didn't know they were underpaid or they were staying too long, and it interfered with their career progression. So I want to start with Michelle and talk a little bit about the HR talent management process. It's often a mystery for people, right? We don't always know what happens behind the curtain, how decisions are made, how organizations are thinking about you as talent and the next project or the next opportunity. What's happening in that corner room when you're not there? And what are the conversations happening? So Michelle, tell us a little bit more about what can an employee ask their HR talent management if they're feeling a little warm about the organization, as you mentioned, and what might be some options they can explore?
Good question. I love being an HR person. My team's laughing. I love it. But for so long, the entire practice has been deemed like the grim reaper, right? Everyone's heard this, the grim reaper of any company. And I feel sad about that, right? Because it's the worst part of our job. But the whole practice has been sort of shoved behind this curtain as a really transactional and scary place to be. The best kind of talent people, in my opinion, are really shaping the future of work, right? And helping people create a space for themselves there. So whether it be that you feel passed up for an opportunity, or whether you're curious about how to plug in different ways in different communities within the organization, or whether you're having a disagreement with your boss, or you want to understand what the purpose and the values are of the organization, your talent person should be your partner, right? As much as possible, we try to remain as neutral as possible, right? In support of our employees to thrive and in support of the company. So to answer your question more directly, when and how, I'd say when, anytime. Right, we could be your coach the whole way through. And in regards to any topic, often we're just the connectors, right? Especially in larger organizations, it's really hard to understand where to fit in outside of your desk mates, outside of your client team, outside of your department, and we could certainly help with that. So if you're feeling a little bit warm, express your curiosity to the talent person and the HR person, and we could certainly help.
Where have you seen the best approach? Who's done that well? What does that look like?
From the talent side or an employee?
From the talent side. From the employee side, employee.
But
Who's come to you and really come with the best approach to checking out how they're perceived in the organization? How do you get that feedback and direction?
before there's an issue.
Well, they're coming to you after the issue.
No, not always, not always, not always. You know,
But yes, before.
So there's proactive and reactive, right? Proactive is you're trying to settle into an organization or you're on a new team and you just want to know what's available to you. I always think that's best. Like know all of your tools, know who your allies can be, get plugged in with a mentor, ask for these things proactively because then that preempts there ever being the issue. But if there is an issue, you know, we have a responsibility. And in that case, being open, being honest, being direct, and just knowing what your rights are in that situation are really important, right? I think people feel scared to come to HR because, and we've been in, I've been in this position. You know, they say, I'm telling you this. I was slighted, I was looked over, someone said something horrible, I'm really offended, but please, don't say anything. Right, and it depends on the severity of that instance, but sometimes we have to. So it's really important to have this open and honest dialogue in those situations about what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And, you know, good HR people know where the line is. To sort of say, I can lead you up into this point and not say a thing, but after that, or if it ever gets to this point, we'll need to, extend it and be a little bit more open about it.
I heard this term over the last couple of days, thought partner. So sometimes before you go to HR, having someone, regardless of what their dimension is, or even if they work at the agency, who's your touchstone, who's your thought partner to check, so you can talk to that person about anything. But remember that when you're going into HR. Thank you. So Mike, you have some deep...
Throat, because I wanted to hear a question.
Oh, good. I'm glad. So you have, you've been a leader in this space for a long time, overseeing a major agency. So you sat in the corner office and heard many conversations about talent and people. What are your thoughts about what does it look like when someone is managing up properly, and what are some of the missteps?
Is this on? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's funny because I experienced this two ways, and the way that I've seen people really succeed in moving up isn't necessarily outperforming everybody else. It's asking the right help from their supervisor, from their immediate supervisor. And when Michelle was talking about, don't say anything, I would get that information all the time, and I go right to the supervisor, and not as a CEO, but just as someone who cares about the company, say, look, what can you do here with this individual to make sure that he or she stays challenged and feels like they belong and can do their best work? And I never once had an instance with those individuals where they didn't, take that on as a real responsibility and try to make a difference for somebody. The individuals that I've seen do the best, get promoted the quickest, ironically aren't the ones who just, do great work. They're the ones who ask the question of their supervisor, how can I be more valuable to this company? It's not how can I move up more quickly. It's a business. So you ask, and it forces that individual, your supervisor, to think about, well, how would I make more of this individual, of this employee? How do I see her moving into a role that matters a lot to our company and makes us more money? And I think that's a great question. I was stumped by that, I think, the first time somebody asked me that way, because the answer usually was, well, just, do your job and show up and, you'll move along. But when you put it in terms of dollars and cents, it made me think about those people differently.
There's a lot of conversations in Harvard Business Review about how performance reviews and giving feedback about what you did in the past is not very helpful, but asking, moving forward, what should I be doing? What should I be paying attention to is more advice versus feedback on something that happened already is a better approach. So that makes a lot of sense. So Christian, I want to bring you into the conversation because you represent the role model of the talent that we'd like to see even more of in the business, really thriving and doing well. Tell us about your movement story and how you made your decisions to stay or to go.
Oh, okay, good question. My movement story, it's always been just always trying to go up. My decision to stay, like I said, is always based on what I'm working on, and I'm actually working in my dream job. I've always wanted to work on commercials ever since I was watching Bewitched as a kid. But now I'm in this world where I'm actually, I did, thank you. But I mean, I'm doing stuff that I love. I'm working with people that I love. I'm working on brands that I love. And so my decision to stay, I'm in a good place. I'm in a happy place. It's not always peaches and cream, but it's peaks and valleys. But my decision is based on my happiness, and right now I've found a happy place, and I just want to keep moving up, making my team happy. My team is everything to me.
I got to dig into that.
Yes, let's dig it.
I
Get your shovel.
Happy will not be enough. So everybody's happy is different, right?
Absolutely.
So I have a philosophy, so in case anybody steals it, give me credit for that. So in the research I've done, everyone has a personal culture, right? So no matter where you're from, where you grew up, what your dimension is, what your values and experiences, those make up your own personal culture. And being aware of what those values are, what makes you happy, what's important to you, what your norms of relationships are. It's important to know what those are and aligning that with the company that you work with, because each organization has its own culture. So they have their own norms. This is how we do business. This is how we build relationships. This is how we make decisions. This is how we move up. This is how we reward people and recognize talent. So tell us more about why it is that you are in a happy place. What are the things that you value most? And how do you determine if a company will be a good, happy place for you? How did you make that alignment?
Ooh, good question. Got my happy place from finding what made me happy within. And what makes me happy within is honestly pleasing people, as silly as that may be. And within every organization that I've worked with, I've seemed to be able to find that knack. My team, I find that they treat me like family, and that's everything to me. Disappointing, like if I look at things like in a darker light, I can always look at things, why am I the only black person here? Why aren't we focusing on any black campaigns? Why? And instead of focusing on that, I do my job and then I try to integrate where I come from, which is basically a well-rounded background, which is basically we all have a place. There's a time and a place for everything. Okay, maybe this doesn't fit with this one, but maybe the next project we can work on this. And lately, my team has been doing that. If I bring up an issue, they're coming up and they're addressing it, which is, again, I'm not working on an all-black campaign, which will hopefully happen one day, but I'm not gonna focus on what we're not doing and I wanna focus on what we are doing and how I can make it better. So my voice is heard the next round, if that makes any sense, and I hope it does.
No, it's excellent. Okay. When you were thinking about going and choosing that next place, what stood out for you that was said or in that process to identify where you are as a place that you could thrive?
Honestly, it was the money. Sorry.
So much for the happy.
I'm sorry.
That's a good segue.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm sorry. It was the money, but I mean, I've never been promised that you're going to do this and you're going to have this. You're going to have your own department.
That's
I'm going to give you a corporate account. I'm going to give you addressing. I've never been promised anything except for if you do this, you'll get a paycheck, and so that's what I do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to pivot to money. Money's important, right? So we know that coming in, it's not, beautiful. But we know that there's a lot of money that can be made in this business. And navigating that when you first come in versus, getting to the Mikes and the Christians of the world of having a lucrative retirement is the gold standard. But there's a lot of messiness in the middle. And we know that women are paid less. We know that black women and Latino women are paid even less than that in terms of gender pay gap. So making sure that there's that you're paid competitively and knowing what that is and figuring out the transparency in that can be a little difficult, right? So Michelle, I'm gonna throw it back to you. What are your thoughts both from a talent and employee perspective and a company's perspective around pay equity? What should people be asking? What should we know? And what is the role of the organization?
Good question. Demystifying pay practices right now, I think, is some of the most interesting work being done in the workplace right now. So I would encourage everyone to ride this wave, right? Because you have a place, you have a voice, the door has opened. And I tell people at work this all the time, we're not volunteers. It is good and it is proper and it is appropriate to talk about money. So if you are starting out, we've learned this at Forsman Bodenfors, we assess the pay gap and we assess pay equity regularly. And we learn.
Where in the What is your sense?
We have learned that it is very rare.
Very rare.
And that there are no standards or regulations actually for reporting.
Yeah.
But there's
That
it's
you'll
a
see
whole,
now ask for pay equity. Pay,
yes, this year it just
right?
started.
For the first time.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah. So it's appropriate and it's right. And what we learned through this work over the last year is that starting pay is the #1 driver of the pay gap in this country and at work, right? And if we continue at the pace that we are, it's going to continue for another 200 years in this country. So there's crazy statistics around it. So anyway, when you're starting, before you even walk in the door, ask what the company's point of view on pay practices and equal pay for equal work, right? And that in and of itself will tell you a ton about the culture and the practice and the leadership and the talent team and all these other things. So get it sorted when you join and understand what the practices are once you're there. And, you know, for so long it was inappropriate to talk about your salary and never really happened. But now at work, people are always talking about what they're earning. And I think it's quite interesting and a good thing, right? Because there are now natural checks and balances. So talk to people inside, talk to people externally, do your research. And I'd say my last piece of advice is start to learn these things before performance review time, before it's your increase time, before it's 2 years and it's been too long and all this resentment builds up, right? Because at that point, you've made the decision, should I stay or should I go? So understand what the practices are, what the policies are, so that when it is your time, you have all of the tools to ask the question of how can I bring more value to this organization? Okay, now I want to be paid this. Right, and you're that much more suited to do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Does everyone in the room have their circle, their network, their inner circle, their board of directors, or whatever you call it, in the industry? I hear a bunch of hand raisers. Everybody got it? If you don't have it, you need to get it, like yesterday. So part of the checks and balances is having your network of peers to bounce some of this information off. Even while you're doing that, one of the things that I see is sometimes people don't do the checking. So just checking in with a recruiter, I call it like, you know, your regular checkup. You know, we know we're supposed to get a checkup once a year. If you're not just checking in with a recruiter to get a sense of whether you're competitive, whether your pay is competitive, what's happening with the market. I used to get the calls all the time. I don't have that information anymore, so I can't help you. But that is super important to have a relationship with a recruiter that you trust that you can just do a check-in. Often people check in after it's too late. You know, they've lost the role, they lost the job, they left the job, and then they want to check in. That's way too late. So managing your career along the way and doing those checks and balances is super important. Christian or Mike, do you have any other thoughts about pay? How did you negotiate that increase?
A great big salary.
I'll let you go first.
Yikes. You know, some brutal honesty is sometimes you got to move to make more money. All I would say is, so we knew that at about 3 years in, our entry-level people were going to be out testing the market. And we were prepared to have conversations with them about pay, but I'm not proud of this, but we would wait until they came to us. So they ended up needing to go out and test the market. We lost some great people that way. And we shifted that policy over time to be much more proactive. But the fact is, the jump you can make in pay after that first few years as a young person is typically difficult for your present-day agency to match, you know, your current agency.
So like 2 to 5?
Yeah, it depends, but I think, you know, we looked at tenured, I think the average is about 4 years that people stay at an agency now. And we made friends with that eventually and said, let's make it the most productive 4 years these folks have and the best, and wring every bit of cash we can out of their performance, and accept the fact that they might move. But yeah, if I'm sitting in the chair as a newcomer to an agency, I think that a little bell goes off around 3-4 years, and I need to find out what the market is.
Yeah.
And be ready to move, by the way, if you do start testing the market, because you can only do that so many times.
Awesome. So And this may be a Michelle or a Mike question. Where have you seen someone make a turnaround from being warm to being hot again? Kind of open up to either of you.
Christian got out of answering.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Christian, that money.
Mike.
That paid.
I want to hear his story.
Honesty is the best policy. When I was younger, I was afraid to ask for raises and tell people what I thought should be earning. And in this day and age, I think we have to stand up for ourselves. I think, because nobody else is going to do it. If you don't say what you're worth, they're not going to tell you what you're worth. And the worst thing they can do is tell you no, and then that lets you know what your next steps are. Look for other work. I didn't realize that we can go to the recruiters and say, hey, can we review my status and see where we're going? Always thought that was your immediate supervisor. So after hearing this panel, rally your troops together, get your allies, make it known what you want, and then go talk to the person who you want and ask for what you want. Don't Mickey Mouse, because they'll Mickey Mouse you back, and it's just going to piss you off. So if you're worth the 5,000 jump, say it, because the worst thing they can tell you is no.
Any feedback on that, Michelle? I know you've been in those conversations.
Yeah, I get really disappointed in the industry
Yeah.
because it's so expensive when when anyone leaves. It's really expensive for the company. Like 70 to 100, I think the SAT is like 70 to 125% of that person's salary.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
to
if
replace
someone wants to go from entry-level salary to 10, give them make sense of it.
Damn it.
So I don't know. If you're leaving with anything, get paid well for what you're doing. You deserve it. And the company owes you big time for that. Blows my mind. Sorry.
Passion point.
Yeah.
So, turnaround stories. Have you seen someone go from warm to, I'm loving it here, I see a career track, and I'm a big fan of a career tree versus a career ladder. So sometimes we haven't talked about it, but sometimes you do need to make a lateral move. You may not want to go up, but you may need to make a different type of move, a lattice. Is sometimes an image that's used around your career projection.
Yeah. It happens in two ways, I think, mostly. Either you're on the wrong team, in the wrong job, reporting to the wrong person, right? And then it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel comfortable. You're not, to your point, you're not bringing your best ideas to the table. Sometimes when we're able to change that, the turnaround happens. And then they're glowing and they're happy and the work is better and it all sort of feeds one another. The other thing that we've seen is when people bring their passions from outside of work inside of work. So maybe it's a group that maybe they knit and they start the knitting group at the
I
company.
just found out that's like a major thing.
It's a thing.
Me too, that's why
Right?
I'm using it, it's huge, it's huge. But maybe you're a runner, or maybe you want to be a mentor and you've never done that before, and maybe you need to be mentored and you've never had that before. So, I don't know, when connections are created outside of your day job, often I find that I like the tree, right? Because that's just another offshoot that makes you a bit more well-rounded and connected in different ways. So that's how I've seen the turnaround.
Awesome. Mike, any turnaround stories?
Well, quickly, I was talking about once in a while doing saves on people who had been out testing the market, and something that we learned is that it typically doesn't turn them around. And it's why we got more proactive and preemptive about that, because we found that far and away the majority of those people would leave us within 1 year anyway, even with the raise. And then they'd made up their mind, these
Kind of
folks
taints
don't.
them?
Pardon?
Does it taint them?
It taints them,
internally?
yeah. I mean, they went through a process where they were probably kind of pissed off and felt unappreciated. And some people let them know that we'd appreciate you here. And they got a dollar figure and they went back with it and they got their raise. But they felt like it was kicking and screaming. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult to turn people around that way. I'm with you. If they can feel engaged with their fellow employees, and this is, a big challenge that we're talking about in this group, but if they can feel really engaged, it changes the dimension of their relationship with with work, and, you know, one bad day on a client's business doesn't quite have the same effect because they've got other reasons to be happy.
So I know you've been in the diversity and inclusion space as an advocate and champion for a long time. Where have you seen some success in that relationship building? What have you seen work well? What have you heard that changes the inclusion, especially for people of color in this business?
Yeah, well, with an emphasis on people of color, but really relating to anyone when it comes to inclusion, I think what we've found is you really need to let them bring what they can bring. And you can't fake that. It's not something you can just pay lip service to. And, you know, there have to be ways that people bring, you know, their gender identity, their sexual preference, their whatever, to a community within the office, and can feel like there are people here who understand me. Not everybody, right? But there are people I can go to who aren't my boss, and feel like there's a relationship there that I can trust. So I think inclusion really comes down to trust for me,
Yep.
and I think for most people. And if you don't trust that people value you for who you are, that's a really good reason to leave.
Yeah, awesome. Mr. Fabulous Socks, any thoughts about that?
About my socks? Just kidding.
About the comment. So in the places that you've been, we know what doesn't work,
Yeah.
but where have you seen that trust building, really engaging, especially for people of color? What have you seen companies, when is it done right? What does that look like?
It's hard for me to say because this is the first company that I work with where I'm literally not the only person of color on my team. So like I said, based on my decisions to stay or go, are always based on like if I'm not getting along with my team or I'm not working on a brand that I want to work on. So it's just not based on, it's all I know, unfortunately, and I hate to say that. It's like, it's one of the saddest statements, but being isolated like that, it's all I know. So it kind of puts me in this lone playing field of having to regroup and assess on what's really important. Like I said, obviously they're not bringing in more blacks, and this I'm talking about past companies. They're not bringing in more blacks. That's obviously not important to them. So what is important to me? How am I going to make this my happy place? I need this paycheck. I need to work on my resume. So, like I said, I get close to my team. I lock up family, and if it works out like it's working out now, it's a match made in heaven.
So it's
I
a
hope
nice
I'm answering.
inclusive team that you have
That's what I have to make it because that's all I have, unfortunately. I don't have the camaraderie of other African Americans working with, so I have to find, my happy place, and my team is my happy place. They've accepted me, and that's how I make the most of it.
Can I follow up on that? Because that really made me curious about something. So how do you make those relationships happen?
Like, again, it's all I know. So me walking into a room, this is really embarrassing, but me walking into a room and being the only African American, it's not like, oh God, here we go again. It's a normal day. I'm not tripped up on it.
But there's a closeness you have with your team anyway. Right?
Absolutely. Well, they're very good people, thank gosh. I haven't, worked with anybody who's on the other side of the fence or whatever. But I mean, everybody that I've worked with so far at this agency here has been so welcoming, so accommodating, and so open-hearted. So it makes it really easy. I hope I'm answering you guys' questions.
I could keep asking them, but Carol's the moderator.
So no subtle acts of exclusion. They've been very inclusive to you from
Down to you want to go
started.
get drinks, down to you want to go to get, they always make me feel like I'm welcome.
Awesome. It's the simple things, right? It's the.
That's what makes, what you got to makes me happy, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michelle, are there any interesting things that you're doing very intentionally at your agency to make all talent feel included, but with particular emphasis to talent of color?
Yeah, so many things that we're all so proud of, but we set our intention and our point of view about what diversity and equity and inclusion meant for us when I first started a little over 3 years ago, and that was kind of the first step. And then we defined what that meant. This is how it informs how we recruit people. This is how it informs who we partner with. This is how it informs what we expect of one another. And since then, this is what it means for training and development here. So we've been really intentional with our messaging, and we measure it, right? We talk about this a lot, what gets measured.
I'm a big measurement person.
Yeah,
Everybody
what gets
does
measured
that.
gets done. So we're really transparent about our pay information, about our demographic information, and it's really this sort of like collective approach to the culture. And some of the most interesting work in the agency being done is by our employees. So nothing really ever is like the talent-led HR person, whatever. It's because we feel our responsibility as leadership or as a talent team is really to be the megaphone. So how can we fund you? How can we support you? How can we communicate about what you care about and what you're building? And then it has started from a grassroots effort.
Sure. So I think we have time for questions. I don't know where is there? I can't see anything. Oh, there's a mic coming for you.
No worries, thank you. Hi, my name is Joy. I'm the Diversity and Talent Acquisition Specialist at a very Midwest, very white agency in Ohio. We are being super intentional about what we're doing from a D&I perspective, but from a recruiting perspective, how do you have any like insight or advice, Michelle, on how to position the very white agency that I currently work at to people of color and make it very clear to them that like we may not be where we want to be right now, but we want people to join the agency so that we can get where we're going.
And how to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were actually talking before we came up on stage. Thank you for your question first. There's a ton of, sorry I'm doing this, I just want to make sure I can see your face. There's a ton of work being done, and we can talk after this, and I can give you some stuff to read, and we could stay in touch. But there's a ton of work about why having a diverse team is good for business and the right thing to do, right? So I think as agency leaders and people who hold the checkbook, right, understanding why it's good for business is the first step. The second step, from a recruiting perspective, that I think is really interesting that we do at Forsman Bodenfors is we've committed to diverse pipelines, based on some other studies about, when there is one person from an underrepresented group in a pipeline, they statistically have a 0% chance of getting hired. Right? So it's a really sad effort when you're like, I've presented my person of color, and why didn't they get, statistically speaking, based on the makeup specifically of your agency too, right? It's not going to work. And then as that number goes up, it almost increases to 50 and 75%. So there's a real case for creativity, innovation, lower turnover, higher financial returns about why it's smart for business and good for teams. Then there are some real moves that you can make against that when you're recruiting, when it comes to your pipelines.
I just wanted to build on that. I used to do, when I was doing recruiting, I've worked with agencies and companies in Minneapolis, in Richmond, in Denver, in a variety of markets that are not top 10. If it's not a top 10 market, then it's going to be more challenging for a number of reasons. Particularly Black and Latino talent are hesitant to move to places where they don't feel a level of support. And so away from family and spouses and all those kinds of things. But there's also a need to understand what's happening with the culture, with the community. So they want to know from an employer branding perspective how they will be supported. So if there is any diverse talent, it's great to highlight them with short videos. If you're doing anything, if there's mentoring or support, or if you have employee resource groups, or there's community outreach to organizations in the community that they care about, that's something you want to add to your employer brand. Also networking. Salesforce does a really good job of this in Indianapolis, where their Black employee resource group gets together with all of the other companies in that region, and they'll hold events together to show some support. HP also does this in Boise, Idaho. They'll do barbecues in the summer for interns. So creating a sense of community, so people know. When I used to recruit, before I would get to the job description, especially if it was a woman, she would want to know, like, where are the houses of worship, where am I getting my hair done, and where are people going? Like, don't even talk to me about the job description until I know, and I could have that conversation with her, right? But you know, there's Cincinnati does this where they come together to share what they're doing in the community. People are very purpose-driven and they want to know where's the community support. General Mills did a great job when I was doing some recruiting for them where their Black Employee Resource Group would be part of the interviewing process and they could have those conversations. They would take them to dinner. So it may be, where should I live? Right? Where should I, you know, send my kids to school? What's the dynamic? Where's the support? And, you know, you have a confident, so diverse interview panel is also a best practice. So not just who's there, but that's where you can insert people of color in the agency or maybe external partners that you work with to give people a sense of comfort in making such a drastic move, or not drastic move, such a different move.